So, time for me to continue my 40k Beginner's Guide series of videos as I explain how to make an army list 8th edition. It's coming right up. Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. And if you're new to the channel and you want to learn about Necrons and more, then please subscribe and hit the bell button to turn on all notifications so you don't miss an upload. Stupid lawnmower! Now, it's been a while since I made the first video in this series, about 8 months. However, I know that first video was quite popular, so I really wanted to make these follow-up videos. Now, in the first video we looked at battle-forged armies from the main core rulebook, and we looked at detachments and how they work. Now, in this video I want to have a look in the Codex itself. I want to take a closer look in the Codex, have a look at the data cards, the stratagems, the keywords, just explain exactly what it's all about, your next step into building an army list. This video is really aimed for beginners to this hobby, so I really hope it helps. Now, for reference, I would love to know, how long have you been playing 40k? Let me know in the comments box below. Now, before we take a look at the Codex, there's a few things that we need to consider when making an army list. As a beginner to this game, well, you have to bear in mind that it might take you a little while to get used to making a decent list. In actual fact, I would say don't focus on that. Focus on one thing only. Actually, it's just lawnmower. Off! Hate that lawnmower. Don't even know if you can hear it on camera. How long does it take to mow a lawn? As a new player to this fantastic game of ours, well, you are going to take some time to get used to making lists and indeed to making good lists. And I think that's what I want to get across here, that it will take you time. You have to be a bit patient. Just have fun along the way, playing those starter games that you play. Now, if you're playing against somebody that's also learning, well, it's going to be easier because you'll learn together. Of course, if you're playing against someone who's been into the hobby for a long time, maybe a pick-up game at your local gaming store, well, don't be surprised if you do get beat, and you get beat badly. However, it's all a learning process, and I'm hoping that this series of videos is going to help you learn a little bit quicker. Now, one thing that I like to do when I'm making my army lists is I like to make the list around a particular unit, a unit that I maybe really like or that inspires me from the fluff of the unit, or potentially just my latest units that I've just finished painting. I'll build a list around that unit. Now, we're going to talk more about building an actual list later in the series. Like I said, today we're going to investigate the Codex itself and find out how it all works. Right, I'm going to use these two codexes here as examples. We've got the Necrons one and the Craftworlds one. Now, obviously, each army has its own codex and its own abilities, but I'm going to use these two just as an example, just to give you an idea of how the codexes change depending on the armies. Now, it's fair to say that the Necron one is a bit newer than the Craftworld one, and to be honest, the layout of the Craftworld one is shockingly bad, especially when you compare it to the Necron one. So the newer codexes tend to have a better layout. Anyway, let's get straight on to the main areas that we need to look at to build an army list. Okay, so in the Craftworld Codex here, the actual rules don't start until page 78. Everything that goes before that is basically the story of the army and the different units, also known as the fluff. So the first section here is basically the army-wide special rules. First of all, you've got keywords, which relates to the individual data cards, which we'll look at in a second. And then here it says in brackets, craft worlds. So there are generally 5 different types of armies within a codex. In the Eldar Codex, sorry, the Craft World Codex, they are called Craft Worlds. You've got Samhan, you've got Elotic, you've got Ulthwaite. Those are the different Craft Worlds. Now, if I bring in the Codex Necrons, we have the same thing. You've got keywords. Now, their different army factions are called dynasties, and you'll find each particular codex will have a different name for this, but effectively it's the same. It's a way of making your different units interact with each other. We will talk more about these particular functions as we look at the data cards. Now, we then have the abilities. The abilities are basically the army special rules. So in the Necron Codex, we've got Reanimation Protocol. No other armies have this particular rule. We've also got Living Metal. In the Eldar Codex, they have their own special abilities, Ancient Doom and Battle Focus. They also have the Path of Command. That's their special abilities. Now in the Eldar Codex, it also has the Craft World's War Gear list in this area, which is a ridiculous place to put it, but it is there. The Necron one doesn't have that because it's much better laid out. Okay, so let's have a close look at the data cards. Let's explain exactly what that's about. So the data card is effectively the unit entry, this section here with all of the rules for that particular unit. Now in the top left-hand corner we have a symbol. Now this symbol indicates whether the unit is a HQ, a troops, a fast attack, a transport. Each particular data card will have, let's get to some different entries because these are all HQ entries. Here we go. So this is an elites entry for the flayed ones, for example. Now for whatever reason, Games Workshop have decided not to write elites, troops or whatever in the codex. You just get the symbol. Of course, in the main rulebook, which we looked at in the last video, it does actually say troops next to the troops symbol. So that's how you match up the symbol to the different entries. Also at the back of the codex there's a page which lists down all of the units and their entries. However, the Necron Codex is wrong. It's this section here where it says points value. It actually lists down death marks and lit guard as troops when they're not, so they're actually elites. However, this has been updated in an FAQ, and of course all the points values for the units are now in the chapter approved update, which is this book here. So this has all the new point levels for all the different armies. So this you will need to give you the points which are up to date for the codex. All the FAQ updates are free and you can find them on the Warhammer community website. Now we will come back to points in a minute, but let's go back to the data card. So let's continue with the flayed ones. So we know we've got the unit entry, so these are elites, and next to it we have power. Now this one says 4 power, and actually if you read this it says this unit consists of 5 flayed ones. It can include up to 5 additional flayed ones. Power rating of 4, so it's 4 points for 5. If you take 10 it's going to cost you 8 points. Now this is for open play where you're playing power levels rather than points. Now power levels is a fun, quick way to get an army on the table. However, it's not particularly fair. And the reason for that is highlighted here with, say, Canoptic Wraith. So these are power level 9, that's for 3 of course, but it has many war gear options which you can take. Now the war gear options are cost free because you're just playing power level. So actually you could take all of the war gear options and you're still only paying 9 points for them. So it becomes quite an uneven game when you're playing power level. I would recommend you play points values. It really does even up the battlefield and just makes it a little bit fairer. Power level is good if you want a quick, hassle-free game, but if you want to, well, take it a little bit more seriously, then you will need to play points. Okay, so continuing on with the data cards, we're on the Tomb Blades entry here in the Necrons Codex. This is a fast attack choice. So of course it says the name of the unit, Tomb Blades, and then you have this little stat line here of this particular unit, and each one of course has this, and each one has its own stats. So you have M, which is movement, so these can move 14 inches. We have WS, which is weapon skill, so in close combat these will hit on a 3+. We then have BS, which is your ballistic skill, that's for shooting, so when you shoot you'll be hitting on a 3+. 3+ basically means a 3 or more, so 3, 4, 5 and 6. You then have S, which is strength, so strength 4. And we've got the little chart in the main core rulebook which tells you about strength and toughness. Now toughness is the T next to the strength, these are toughness 5. So using that chart I could tell you that a strength 4 weapon against a toughness 5 means that you'll be wounding on a 5. So first you have to hit and then you have to wound. Now the Tomb Blades have 2 wounds each, that's what the W stands for, wounds, and they have 1 attack each, which is what the A stands for. Their leadership 10. Now leadership is done in the morale phase, again you can find that in the main rulebook, but if you lose some models on that unit then you're susceptible to a leadership check, and that's what your leadership stat is. You then have SV, which is your save, so these have a 4+ save. In other words, if somebody's managed to hit you and then they've managed to wound you, you will get a chance to have a save. So on Tomb Blades it's a 4+. Having said that, there's a lot of things in the game which can change all of these stats, what they call modifiers. Now the little description underneath tells you about unit size. It starts off with the minimum amount, so in Tomb Blades instance it's 3 Tomb Blades, so you have to take at least 3 Tomb Blades. Now if you're playing power level you can only take this unit in 3s. It says you can add another 3 for a power rating of 5, and then you can add another 3 for another power rating of 5. However, if you're playing points level, because the points are on individual models, you can take as many as you like as long as you meet the minimum requirement, in this case it's 3, or the maximum requirement, in this case it's 9. Now of course the Craftworld Codex data cards are basically exactly the same. You've got the unit type, so in this particular instance it's transport, the power level, the name, all of the movement and other stats along here. However, one thing to note, on certain entries, like the Wave Serpent, usually it's vehicles and monstrous creatures, something with a lot of wounds, but you have this extra box here, which is the damage box. Effectively, as the unit takes wounds, the stats get worse. So in this instance, we've got between 7 and 13 wounds, 13 being the amount of wounds that this particular unit has. Its movement is 16 inches, its ballistic skill is 3 and its attacks is 3. However, when it drops down to 4 wounds to 6 wounds, its movement is reduced to 12 inches, it hits on a ballistic skill of 4+, and it only does D3 damage. And then when it gets to 1 to 3 wounds, it's 8-inch movement, it hits on a 5+, and it only does 1 damage. So watch out for that little box, especially on units which have a lot of wounds, mainly vehicles and monstrous creatures. So going back to our Tomb Blades, next is the weapons. It tells you the weapon that it comes with in the description above. So it says each model is equipped with 2 Gauss blasters. Now the weapons and the actual unit itself in terms of points are priced differently. So when you look for the points in our chapter approved update, it tells you the points for the fast attack Tomb Blades, which is a unit between 3 and 9, 14 points each. However, you have to pay for your weapon separately. So in this case we've got the Gauss blasters, which are 7 points, and it says it's equipped with 2 of them, so you have to pay 14 points for your Gauss blasters. Now you do have options, of course, so for example it says just below all of the stats, weapon options, any model may replace its 2 Gauss blasters, sorry, not Gauss blasters, Gauss blasters, with 2 Tesla carbines or a particle beamer. So in this case you would take the base points of 14 and then you'd add in the points of the guns which you're choosing. So if you go for Gauss blasters, and of course it's another 14 points. However, you've got a few extra options as well. Not necessarily every unit can change its gun or change the options, the war gear options as they call it, but a lot of units can. So having a close look at the war gear options for Tomb Blades, it says any model may take a shield vane. So that means you can put it on any model. You don't have to take it on all of them. Sometimes the unit entry here will say all models must take it. So have a good read of this because it can make a difference. Either some of the models can take it or all of the models have to take it. So yeah, in this particular instance, any model can take a shield vane. So you look up the points for shield vanes and you add those points for how many you're taking to your 28 points that you've already taken. And then at the bottom there it says any model may take a nebuloscope or a shadow loom. So you can't take both of these, you can only take one of them. But again, it is on any model on Tomb Blades. Not many units have that ability. Usually you have to take the war gear option on all of them. However, for Tomb Blades you can take it on just a couple if you want to. So you work out all of the points for all of the war gear options that you're taking. You add them together for a single points cost for one model in the unit, and then of course you times that by how many models you're taking. No way, not a lawnmower. Who the hell's gonna mow their lawn at this time? Oh, it's actually the next door neighbour. It's gonna take friggin' ages. Okay, got to stop recording them. Now just above the war gear options you've got the weapons, and what it does, it gives you the statistics of the weapons. It gives you the range in inches, it gives you the type of weapon which is referenced in the main core rulebook for their special rules, and then it gives you the strength, the armour penetration, the damage and any abilities. So you have choices in guns with the Tomb Blades, although some units, let's go back to the Eldar Codex for example, War Walkers, here it just lists the Shuriken cannon down, which is the weapon that it comes with. It tells you about all the other weapons that it can take, but it doesn't tell you in the Codex what the stats are for the other guns. You have to go to a different area, and that's why this Codex just isn't as well laid out. Right at the back of the book on page 110 you've got the ranged weapon stats and you've got the melee stats over on the next page. The Necron Codex does have this, but most of the gun options are listed within the data cards themselves, so just a little bit easier to use. That's probably because, well, Necrons just don't have as much choice. Now continuing on with the next box, we have the ability. So we've already done the abilities for the army, that's like the army wide abilities. Now we're looking at the actual unit abilities itself. So it lists down which army wide abilities it has. So in this instance it's Ancient Doom and Battle Focus. Not every unit in the Codex will have the army wide abilities. That's true in the Necron Codex as well. You then have some of the individual special rules for that particular unit. In this particular instance with the War Walkers we've got Scout Vehicle, we've got a Power Field and it explodes, and it explains all about what each of those special rules does, either in the entry where the data card is or somewhere else in the Codex which you'll have to find depending on which Codex you have, but every single ability has its own special name. Okay, so then we come to faction keywords and keywords. So the faction keyword one is very important. In this instance it's Necrons and Dynasty. And when we read the Dynasty entry at the beginning of this section, which we were looking at just a second ago, here we go, Dynasty entry, it tells you to insert in brackets where that says Dynasty which dynasty you're using. Now the dynasties are listed towards the back of the codex. There's a bit of a flicking exercise with these codexes. The Necron one, like I said, isn't quite as bad as some of the others. But even so, there's some flicking. So it lists down the 5 different dynasty codes which are available to Necrons, Sotek, the Novok, Nihilic, and they all have their own little special rules. So for example, if you go for Nihilic, you're able to re-roll the 1s if you stand still when you're shooting. Now of course there's only 5 dynasties here listed, however you may have a custom dynasty or a custom craft world where you've painted them in your own colours, you've got your own story and your own background. Well, what you can do is you can find the rules which sort of match the fluff, the history of your particular army, and then you can apply them to your army, but obviously just change the name. So if you're using Sotek rules but your army's called the Inotech dynasty, well what you would do is go to your entry, and where it says dynasties you'd insert Inotech in that particular entry. Now the idea is when you're doing a detachment, which we talked about in the previous video, the whole of the detachment has to be both Necrons and it would have to be the same dynasty. You can't mix dynasties except if you take different detachments. So you could have one detachment in Nihilic and then you could have a second detachment in Novok. All the units in that detachment Novok, all the units in that detachment Sotek. However, if you had a Sotek dynasty Cryptek, he couldn't use his special rules on your Novok dynasty units. He can only use them if they're on the same dynasty. So that's why you've got the dynasty codes listed within the data cards. And it's exactly the same for most of the other armies as well. So in the Craft World one, you've got the different factions listed here, the Bautan, their special ability and rules. Now, as well as faction keywords, you've got keywords. So for example, in Necron Immortal entry at the bottom, keywords, infantry and immortals. Now the infantry keyword is a special keyword, particularly for that unit type. So if you looked at Tomb Blades are bikes. Now you have to go back to the main rulebook to find out exactly the difference between the different type of units. Also maybe in some of the FAQ updates where the rules have changed. But bikes, for example, can't claim a cover save. Infantry move better in terrain. There are some unit types like vehicles that can only claim a cover save under certain circumstances. So that's what the keywords are all about. Now when you're building an army list, one of your models can become a warlord. Most people use one of their characters to be the warlord. Now the warlord has some special extra things that he can do. A warlord can take a warlord trait. Now the warlord traits you can choose either from the main rulebook. You have some universal warlord traits in your actual codex, and then usually you have a dedicated warlord trait to the particular faction that you take. So for example, you've got a Sotek warlord trait or a Nihilic warlord trait. So obviously if you're in the Sotek dynasty, you can't take any of these warlord traits down here. You can take this one, or you can choose these, or there are some in the main rulebook. Now warlord traits can have quite a big impact on your army. Some of them just work on the actual character itself, some work on units around the character, and some of the warlord traits are army-wide. So for example, the Sotek Dynasty warlord trait allows you to roll a dice when you use a command point, and you can actually get back a command point. That's an army-wide special ability, whereas some of them only work on the actual character. So it's always worth looking at the warlord trait and seeing how it's going to benefit your particular army when you're building your list. Now, as well as warlord traits, your warlord can take an artifact. Now these have different names depending on your codex. So in the Necron Codex it's Artifacts of the Eons. In the Eldar Codex it's Remnants of Glory. Basically it's a special ability. Some of these special abilities are dedicated to a particular craft world or dynasty. You've got a Sotek Warlord trait and you've got a Sotek artifact. So obviously a Nihilic dynasty can't take the Sotek ability. It's worth working out which one's going to benefit your army the most. Now, the one thing to bear in mind with this is that named characters already have an artifact within their stats. Named characters can't actually change any of their abilities or stats or weapons. They're fixed. So a named character already has his artifact. However, you can still choose your Warlord trait for the named character. Now that doesn't mean that you can't take an artifact in your army. It just means that the named character gets it for free. So if you've got Imitek the Stormlord, which already has his artifact, his staff, well, you could then take an artifact on a different character. So for example, you could give the Veil of Darkness to a Cryptic, and that would be free. Now there are ways to take more artifacts, and that's with stratagems. However, I think we should look at these and the psychic powers in the next episode, where we talk more about building a list. Okay, so there you go. Really hope that was useful to you. Now I've got a video all about 40k play styles, which I'll put up there. I'm sure you would enjoy it. And if you didn't see the first video in this series, well, there it is right there. You should definitely check it out. Beam me up.